What's up, guys? I'm Steven.
And I'm Kylie, and we started this channel to help fellow real estate investors succeed in short-term rentals.
But our investing strategy has evolved so much over the years, we decided to go back to the basics and talk about the business models for making money from a real estate investment property.
We're going to split this video into two main categories: property acquisition and then property listing type. And for each one, we'll be sharing our personal experience as well as pros and cons of each model.
If you hear something helpful today, please hit that like button. Let's get started.
Let's start with property acquisition, or really, how much ownership do you have of a particular rental property?
The first model that we have a lot of experience with is co-hosting or the property management model. And these two terms are often used interchangeably by people, but in our minds, they really are kind of different.
Co-hosting to us means that you are hosting in tandem with the property owner, meaning that the client is probably more hands-on in some aspects of the operations of the property than our property management clients typically are.
Maybe the co-host is handling all the guest messaging remotely, and maybe the owner is an on-site contact, or maybe that arrangement is flip-flop.
We also usually see a co-host being added on to an owner's listing page on Airbnb, for example, instead of the property manager owning the listing page like we do.
Our clients have zero part of any guest interaction, and they're also rarely a part of any of the operations of the property as well. Some may visit a couple times a year, but otherwise they just collect their statement from us and their deposits, and we handle the rest.
Depending on what state you're operating in and whether or not that state requires an active real estate license to manage properties, co-hosting might be your only option instead of a property manager who handles the collection and distribution of funds.
The thing that both of these terms have in common is that you're both managing part of the operations of a property in exchange for a portion of the rental income.
We've seen co-hosts collect a percentage of the rental income or a flat fee per property visit, but in property management, a percentage commission is standard.
In our property management company, we charge 25% of the gross rents for short-term rentals, and with that, we include all the guest consumables in the house. And then for midterm rentals, we discount that slightly to 20%. And also still include the consumables.
Co-hosting became sort of a buzzword over the past year or so, and I think that's why they are used interchangeably so often. But the pros of both co-hosting and property management is that there's little to no risk to you and also little to no startup costs.
Over time, we've invested in things for our business like a nice website and booking tools. We'll link a few of our favorites in the description below.
But when we first got started, all we really needed was a laptop, a cell phone, and a reliable vehicle.
The cons of property management we could go on and on about. We actually did a whole video about how we hate being property managers, and we'll link that at the end of this video if you want to check that out next.
How scandalous.
That was a pretty long and extensive list from that video, but we'll summarize it a bit here in that the main cons of the property management or co-hosting route are: one, limited control over the property because you don't own it, and two, that your income can vary greatly depending on the owner's decisions on how to use or stock that property.
Second major business model for rental income is rental arbitrage. This is where you rent a property for some period of time, often a year, and then you have the ability to re-rent it to short-term rental guests on Airbnb or similar platforms.
We don't have any direct experience with rental arbitrage, mostly because we've always appreciated the equity earning potential of a purchased property versus a leased property.
But that's not to say it's a bad model. You can make plenty of money from rental arbitrage. We just don't have any direct experience with it, so we didn't feel like we should position ourselves as experts and tell you all the great things about it.
Generally, the pro for arbitrage is that it's an initially low investment. You can get started for less capital than you were if you were to purchase a property. It's also a good option for people who may not qualify for conventional financing. Maybe you have poor credit or not enough credit history, and getting a conventional loan is more difficult than getting a lease.
We've even found ourselves in a difficult situation qualifying for loans because of a high debt to income ratio. Creative Finance has saved the day here, and we'll link some of our creative finance videos in the description below too. The cons for arbitrage is that you aren't gaining any equity in the property and there is some risk involved. City regulations could change, or HOA regulations, or the landlord could decide not to renew your lease, and then you could be stuck with furnishings and nowhere to go with them.
Or your property could sit empty for an entire month and you still have the lease payment to make. The third major model is house hacking.
House hacking is when you purchase a property and you live in part of it, and then you also rent out another part of it. This could be individual rooms, or it could be you living in one unit and renting other units of a multifamily property.
Our first short-term rental and our first property that we ever bought together was a duplex. If you've been around our channel for a while, you may have heard this story, but we bought a duplex property in Mission Beach in 2017. First, we renovated the upstairs apartment and then we listed it on Airbnb.
We lived in the downstairs unrenovated unit for about 2 years while we saved up money enough to renovate that unit while we lived in it.
So we were house hacking for a total of 3 years before we moved out of that second unit and then started renting both units on Airbnb.
We loved the house and especially loved the location, but we had outgrown it and we were able to cover the mortgage of the entire property, plus pay the rent for a 3,000 square foot house in San Diego, which wasn't cheap.
That's impressive.
So there were a couple years of sacrifice in there in the beginning. Financially, because we spent all of our money. Quality of life, because we were living in a crappy old beach shack with no storage and no dishwasher and a baby. And again, no money because we spent it all buying and renovating the upstairs part of the house. But we were 40 yards from the beach, so that was a plus.
And it wasn't like we were like fresh out of college and 22 either. Kylie was 30 and I was 33. We had a baby and we were living what was previously a student rental with bongs as decorations.
That's exactly what my mom found when she walked through the property.
They didn't clean up the bongs when they did the real estate showing, so gave the true impression.
This is a frat house. I'm living in a frat house.
The point here is that unless you have a stack of cash from the lottery or a trust fund or a family member who's going to fund the purchase for you, you're likely going to have to make some sacrifices to get into your first property.
We definitely did make some sacrifices, but it all paid off in the end, got us to where we are today. And we're firm believers that hard work combined with some calculated risk usually pays off.
The pros of house hacking is that some or sometimes all of your mortgage can be paid by that rental income that you're generating. In our case at the beach, our whole mortgage was being paid by the rents we were generating from the upstairs unit. So we lived rent-free and were able to save for new projects.
The big con is that it does typically require a big upfront investment. For us, it meant every single dollar and cent that we had, but we also went pretty big for our first purchase, being a duplex property like right at the beach. It was definitely above our means at the time.
We wouldn't recommend overextending yourself like that unless you're like super confident that the rental income is going to be a slam dunk.
Another con, kind of like we were explaining, is that living in a house hacking situation can sometimes be less than ideal. Maybe it's small or not as fixed up as you would be accustomed to. Maybe you're renting out rooms in your house and you're having roommates all of a sudden that you're not used to. Or even just living on site with your property is just a different dynamic. You kind of feel like we shared a garage, for example, with our guests. And so you felt like you could never walk out there and not be like on and in host mode. You know what I mean?
House hacking might not be for everyone, but it is a great way to get started into a property that you might not otherwise be able to afford.
And then the fourth acquisition model is the most standard purchasing model, that is buying a property and setting it up and renting it out.
Most people are probably going to go this way when purchasing an investment property. It may involve rehab or it might not, but the goal is to always get it online as fast as possible to start making money.
We have a video coming up soon with our top tips for getting a property online as quickly as possible. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications turned on.
In the meantime, we do have a ton of free resources available to help you set up your short-term or midterm rental property. We'll link those in the description below.
Once you've acquired that property, either through a property management or co-hosting contract or by purchasing the property yourself, you have three main ways to position that property.
The first is to position it as a long-term rental, typically with year-long leases. There's always going to be a demand in pretty much every market for long-term rentals. The con here is that the income you can generate is generally less than what you could generate with a short-term rental or a furnished midterm rental.
We don't talk about this very much on our channel, mostly because right now our investing is focused on short-term and midterm rentals, but we actually do own one long-term rental property in San Diego.
I bought a house in 2009 with a good friend of mine, and we lived there for a few years. Kylie even lived there for a while before we ended up deciding to rent it long term.
That property isn't a huge source of income for us, but it has appreciated by almost 300% in the 15 years that we've owned it. So that is equity that we might want to tap into someday.
We actually did tap into it when we were purchasing our beach house. We did a cash out refi. Some of that cash went towards the down payment for that property. Pros of having a long-term rental are having a pretty predictable and pretty steady source of income, less turnover at the property, and less day-to-day management required from you as the landlord.
And the cons would be a lower rental income compared to short-term rental rates, and also potential damage and extra wear and tear on the property.
With short-term rentals and even with midterm furnished rentals, we're at the property regularly, it's being professionally cleaned, and we're able to keep up with all the maintenance.
Maybe you get an ideal tenant in your long-term rental that keeps the house sparkling clean and never breaks or damages anything, but maybe you don't. It's a gamble, and it's the same gamble that you take with a short-term rental or a midterm rental, but the difference is the amount of time that that person is in there without you being able to see what's happening.
In our San Diego rental, we've been fortunate to have the same group of renters, I think, for the last 5 years. They've been pretty low-key, low impact on us. Not much has happened for maintenance at the house, except they did want us to get involved with some internal bickering and tenant issues they were having, but that was pretty minor.
Get involved in the domestic disputes.
Nah, no place there for you as the landlord.
I'm not a therapist, so.
Second way to position your rental property, and one that we are growing more and more fond of every month, is midterm rentals. Sometimes people refer to this as medium-term rentals or monthly furnished rentals.
They're increasing in popularity, especially as some cities around the United States crack down on short-term rentals.
Depending on what your city or county qualifies as a short-term rental stay versus a out of their jurisdiction long-term rental, these minimum rental periods for midterm rentals will usually be around 28 to 30 days. Here in the Coachella Valley, where we have quite a few midterm rentals, those city by city differences range from 27 nights to 30 nights.
People hear the word midterm rental and they immediately think of travel nurses or Furnished Finder as a booking platform, and that may be the primary source of traffic in some markets, but in our markets we see people coming into our midterm rentals for many more reasons.
We've had digital nomads, and they travel from city to city because they work remotely, so they've stayed 1 to 2 months. People who are considering moving to the area but they haven't yet bought a house or found a long-term lease, they've stayed with us for 1 to 4 months.
Insurance relocations are another topic. People have been displaced from their home through water damage or other things that have happened at their home where they have to move out.
But the most common for our area specifically are snowbirds. So these are people, usually retired couples, that live in cold climates, and they come down to the Palm Springs area to escape to warmer weather in the winter.
Rents for a midterm rental kind of fall in the middle between what you can generate from a short-term rental versus a long-term rental, and they also typically include the utilities covered by the rental rate.
The final category of rentals, short-term rentals, has been our primary focus for investing in real estate.
A short-term rental is a property that's primarily rented out on a short-term basis, usually for stays less than 28 nights. In most cases, guest stays are between 3 and 5 nights, sometimes shorter depending on the minimum nightly stays that we adjust. We'll go shorter in the off-season, for example.
The income potential for this method is the highest, but it also carries more risk, and it's the one that you have to work the hardest to get.
And as more and more short-term rentals come onto the market, competition is increasing year after year, and if you don't keep up, your rental is going to get left behind.
This is especially true now that we are seeing private equity companies and investment businesses getting into the game. Groups that have market research specialists and designers and deep pockets to really make a amenity-packed property.
I wouldn't let this deter you from getting started, but just know that the bar has been raised from years past where design and amenities didn't matter as much as they do today.
We hope you found all of this information helpful and that you feel better prepared on your journey towards investment property ownership.
If you haven't signed up for Airbnb yet, go to arrivals.com/Airbnb and sign up. You'll get a bonus when you complete your first guest stay.
By using that link, which we'll also leave in the description box down below, you'll be connected to us via Airbnb messaging, and you can reach out and we can help you with any questions or concerns along the way.
If you'd like us to dive deeper into any of the topics topics we covered today, leave us a comment below. Otherwise, we'll link a video here on the screen we think you might want to watch next.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.